Welcome back to the Great World Podcast. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, joined once again by co-host Jacob Fulmer. Jake, what do you have for us today?
Today's episode, we are going to be finishing up our Oaths series that we started a couple of years ago, and we will also be talking about raccoon domestication.
Absolutely. I figured it was about time after nearly a couple of years since we've covered our Oath series that we revisited it. Of course, we had always intended to come back to it and debate on it a little bit more. We just hadn't gotten around to it yet. So hopefully we'll be able to make up for that in this episode.
Yeah, so this is actually going to seem a little bit similar to what we have done in the last Oaths episode, except it's going to be a little bit more debate style. It's going to be an informal debate. We're going to be prompted 10 random questions. Both of us have actually not seen these questions ahead of time. They have been created by artificial intelligence. And so then we are going to go through these questions, looking at them for the first time, and debate what we think the answer is to them. And so that's basically how we're going to do a mini informal debate.
Right, and this will be an informal debate, of course, as time goes on and throughout the year. We intend to expand our debate series. Any topics you're interested in seeing, you can always reach out to us, put a comment down below this video. We'll see about covering that. And if you're interested, have experience moderating debates, anything like that, certainly reach out to us as well. That would be great.
Yes, you can also call the GWP media line using 417-448-0819. You can also call that number as well.
Absolutely, yes. Brand new number 2 GWP. So again, that number is 417-448-0819, correct?
Yes, that is the correct number for listeners and viewers to call.
All righty.
Now,
So
for
just give
those
us a
of you
call,
who are
phone us up,
watching,
and let us know.
yes. And for those of you who are watchers here of the Great Oral Podcast, we are going to go ahead and pull up those oath-taking questions that are going to be a part of our sort of, I guess you could say, miniature debate episode, as this will be part of our series that we do today. This won't be a full episode in a more formal debate. We would do a full episode debate series, but because this is just a miniature informal debate, this will just be part of the episode.
Right, naturally, and of course, partly informal because, of course, this episode is just Jake and I. We have no moderator.
Yes, the moderator in this scenario, I guess you could say, would be artificial intelligence, but it's more prompter than it is a moderator.
Right.
So,
Naturally.
so again, I put these questions in here from artificial intelligence, but I did not read them. So again, this is also the first time that I have looked at these questions. So it gives nobody a fair advantage here. So,
of course.
Shall we go to question number 1, Isaac?
Well, let's do it.
Question number 1. Should public officials be required to swear oaths on religious text, or does that violate the separation of church and state? Isaac, what do you think first on this?
My position, no, it does not violate separation of church and state. In terms of separation of church and state, which is more of a concept in terms of those words and founding documents, doesn't actually appear that way, that we do naturally have a separation. Of course, it's a big founding part of our country, nonetheless, with breaking away from England, of course, taxation without representation, and part of that was issues with the Church of England and different things like that. And so to have it a truly combined church and state, a true Christian theocracy, as it were, that would mean a government by prelates or by church officials. And this is far from that. And for simply officials to be sworn in on a Bible as they traditionally have been, it seems appropriate. And of course, the reason for that is that, of course, that's something to take very seriously. There's a pretty good indication if someone says something followed by or preceded by, may God be my witness, they're probably being pretty serious about that. Now, there have been certain questions raised about that as of recent as to, oh, what about the people that don't believe in God? There are more people that don't seem to, but again, for a good part of our history, and there would seem to be for good reason, that is what we've done, sort of. In terms of course, these officials being sworn in, the importance of them to carry out those duties to the best of their abilities. Again, may God be my witness. Again, a very serious thing, and it it wouldn't seem that a book of another sort, as has been used in certain cases recently, as crazy as it may sound, like some random poetry book, doesn't seem to be quite as serious. So I would ask to anyone who has a real objection to swearing in oaths on religious texts like the Bible, as we've traditionally done in the United States, even though we have separation of church and state. Yes, the being sworn in on the Bible, I'd say, is far different from combining church and state. Quite different. I would ask what would be the alternative?
Yeah, and so this is something that we did briefly talk about in part one of our oath taking series, and I think you may recall that I did have some opposition to this, and I did have concerns that it did violate the separation of church and state, partially for the
Yes.
reason that it even says so within the Bible that oaths should be taken very seriously and should not be necessarily taken at certain points in time, and so that was
Mhm.
part of my argument against this. I will say that I think that the church and the state have been separated quite well.
Mhm.
And so I almost don't really think it's a violation when it comes to the separation. I just think it's not necessarily a good idea in general to be making such oaths, particularly for public officials, especially if they're not necessarily going to follow through with whatever it is that they're doing, because then I feel like they may be bound in some way by that oath that they've taken.
Right, right. So that seems like a bit more pessimistic of a view.
Yeah.
Jake, you say, oh well, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing, but obviously, you say these people swear these oaths with no intention of honoring them. Obviously, that is a serious issue, and I would agree with you that
Yeah.
oaths should be taken seriously, and in certain scenarios, they should not be sworn. Of course, obviously, for dishonorable uses and different things like that, things to be done as mockery or as blasphemy. Obviously, that would not be great. Um, but I would think for ceremonies, installations, solemn occasions like that, I would think swearing oaths would be appropriate for that, and it's traditionally what we've used them for quite a while now. There's considerable precedent for it.
Well, and the other thing that I will say about this is I don't know that somebody necessarily can keep whatever they say in that oath to 100%, as we are imperfect as people. And so I
Oh,
would say that
right,
almost
naturally.
everybody is bound to break that. And so then are they necessarily tied to that to life? I think that becomes the really big question or really big concern, I guess you could say.
Well, naturally, and I don't think we're necessarily asking them to do something that's unreasonable. Obviously, to do 100% and everything to be absolutely perfect, obviously that is a goal that's unattainable. But generally, when we have these officials swearing oaths or saying that they're going to fulfill the duties of their office, which they're selected to fulfill to the best of their abilities. I think that's the most that we can ask of them. And generally, with oaths, that's what we're doing.
That is a good point, and I think going back to the second part of the question, does it violate the separation of church and state? I think it depends on what the oath is being used for, how serious it is, and what sort of public official that it may be. And so if we were to break this down a little bit further, then I think maybe there would be some scenarios where it would be a violation. But in general
Uh-huh.
terms, and assuming that it can be broken in the sense that we're not perfect and can sometimes violate it, but that doesn't mean that we're actively trying to violate it. In that sense, I don't think in most cases that it would be a violation of the separation of church and state.
Right, and I
So that
reckon
kind
it
of
could become that, as you mentioned, but I guess to answer the central question, or rather, return to my answer, and I guess this is certainly based on a more strict interpretation of what it would mean. Of course, the alternative to separation of church and state being a Christian theocracy, which of course would be a government by prelates, the same as the church officials. That would certainly be different from this, and there's quite a few steps in between this, and certainly treating sacred things in a way that is sacred whenever we have installation to offices. That is just very, very base level. To take these things seriously would have been commonplace, certainly in early American society. Seems to be something that has held up. And so, to answer the central question, my answer would be no to that. That swearing of oaths for public offices and whatnot is not a violation of the separation of church and state.
overall probably no in this situation, but there are definitely still some arguments that could say in certain scenarios
I reckon
would
there
still
could
be
be
my
some gray
lasting
area.
opinion on this. So that kind of goes over our first question. We'll go ahead and we'll move into our second question. We may not get through all 10 of these questions, just depending on kind of how our time is looking. The second question here is an oath meaningful if the person taking it doesn't personally believe in the values behind it? Okay, this actually kind of is almost a carryover from what we were just discussing.
Yes, absolutely. I suppose it is. And Jake, I guess to answer the question simply, I would say yes, it is still meaningful. We have plenty of public officials who unfortunately don't necessarily believe in God, but of course, nonetheless, that is part of accepting their duties of that office is swearing that oath, and whether they really believe in God or not. Surely they can see, certainly in the context of things like an inauguration, obviously that holds a great deal of weight. Certainly, something like a presidential inauguration, there are a great deal of people in attendance. That's something that society takes very seriously in any case. So there is plenty of reverence, I suppose, for that sort of ceremony, that sort of installation, whether you believe in God or not. And I believe it still can be taken seriously, albeit maybe not as seriously, but it seems to still serve its purpose. And I don't see what a great alternative would be. It seems to work fairly well.
Yeah, I would say that the overall, does it count or is the oath still being made to God? I would say certainly so. Even if you
Mm,
don't believe in him, you're still talking in his name. And so is
right.
it meaningful? Certainly so. Now, does the person believe that it's meaningful if they don't believe in its values? Probably not. So to the person, probably not. But the overall meaning behind it, certainly so. I think even if they don't necessarily believe in what they're saying, they're still saying it to the Lord in that sense. So,
Right, right. And we do have a natural guard against this, which is the election. Of course, that's sort of the civic duty of Americans when they go to the polls to vote for reputable and qualified candidates. So, in this, and I would say generally, it serves its purpose that mitigates most of these issues. But then again, there are few bad nuts now and again who make it further than you expect, which is unfortunate, but seems to be the exception, not the rule.
Yeah, certainly so. So I think we have an overall agreement with the second question, or at least kind of the same
I would
general
say
opinion
so.
on it. Let's go into question number three. Should breaking an oath, whether in politics, marriage, or the military, carry legal consequences or only moral ones? Wow, I really like this question, and I guess I'll go ahead and go first on this one.
Yes.
And I'm gonna say I think it really I think it really depends on the situation. I think would be an easy way to put this.
All right.
I think obviously if you're if you swore that you were going to do something and then you broke the law in order to you broke the law along the way while also breaking your oath, I would say in that scenario that it should carry legal consequences. As far as there, if you didn't do something that was currently considered illegal, then I feel like that's more of something that's morally up to you. So I would say overall, I would probably say that it should not carry legal consequences if it isn't already considered a crime in itself. What do you think?
Well, I would probably I certainly see where you're coming from on that. I would probably disagree on that, and sort of in the nature of these, at least to my understanding, generally when you're sworn in on these oaths, it's sort of sworn to honesty and to fulfill the duties of your office, these responsibilities to the best of your abilities. Now, of course, in the true sense, I'm not going to argue and say we could easily split hairs and say, oh, did this fellow really fulfill this duty to the best of his ability? So I won't argue that necessarily, and I don't think many people would, though it is possible. But I'd say more so the case, and what seems to be the case with a lot of things, and another thing that we've discussed, I believe, maybe earlier on in our debate series, this is sort of a common theme around the whole freedom of speech discussion, and it seems to be sort of a common thing and a common theme in American discourse today is the whole discussion of rights and liberties. We're big on those, of course, but oftentimes we're so focused on what we can do that we fail to consider what we ought to do. And there is an important distinction to be made, I think, between liberty and licentiousness, true liberty being the right to do what you ought. And I would err slightly on the side of rigidity in this in terms of if there is decent evidence, obviously with due process, of course, in law, if this person has violated their duties, but I would still err on the slightly more rigid side in terms of if there is considerable evidence that this person has violated their oath, then by all means, we ought to have legal consequences to back up the moral consequences certainly come on their own, and certainly there are those who say, certainly in the freedom of speech discussion, that you can't legislate morality. um, but again, in certain cases it is very easy to split hairs on this, and at a very fundamental level that is essentially what law is doing in most all cases. Does that answer the
So it almost
question?
seems like that this is kind of a trick question in a sense because
It
it kind of
does.
already answers itself for it. I mean, if it's something that's illegal, then there should be legal consequences, but in the sense of moral ones as well. So that's kind of an interesting question. We'll kind of scroll down into the fourth question here. Are loyalty oaths in workplaces or government agencies a legitimate security measure or a form of coercion?
Okay. um well, if you'd like me to say first, probably unsurprisingly, I don't think that swearing oaths um as far as going into these public offices and different things is a form of coercion. People aren't coerced into this, and a great evidence of this would be that you're not required to do this. Of course, you are if you would like to fulfill the office, but if that's really an issue, you can always back out if you would like to. I wouldn't say in a true sense that anyone is being forced to take this oath. And again, they're not being forced to again profess faith or belief necessarily. And unfortunately, of course, certainly goes on that there are many who swear these oaths that don't necessarily take it seriously, that don't necessarily believe in God, and therefore, maybe in their eyes, doesn't hold the same weight. Certainly, though, unfortunately, that does occur. But again, in terms of sort of returning to the religious question, or just being forced in general, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of evidence that those who are swearing oaths are being forced or coerced into it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say considering that every person does have a choice to decline taking the oath,
Right.
that certainly kind of implies that they're not being forced in a sense in order to do that. Some people may argue that it's silly that you have to do something that you maybe not believe in order to get the office, and so you feel forced to do it in order to get your office. But I still feel like that we can't really argue that that is coercion, and so I would
Right.
definitely be in agreement with what you just said there. And so we go into our fifth question here. Do oaths actually promote honesty, or do they just create a false sense of trust? I feel like this is a pretty simple one. And I feel like that yeah, oaths do promote honesty in a way. It holds people accountable, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to guarantee that somebody's going to be honest, but it holds them to maybe a higher standard, or it gives them another reason for why they should hold up their oath. And as far as does it create a false sense of trust, I think you have that either way, whether or not you take an oath, but I think you're less likely to have that if you have an oath that's been taken because
Right.
people are going to be more likely to try to uphold what they have now sworn.
Right. Certainly couldn't hurt. And that would
So,
certainly be my view, Jake. And of course, having been a part of different student organizations, I mean, taken oaths, being sworn into certain offices, um, it certainly it is something that of course is taken very seriously. It's certainly being in that position. That's something you have to step back and of course anyone certainly probably taking these oaths sort of ought to step back, think through what they're saying, and sort of does really promote honesty. Especially, it can be a bit difficult to describe, but of course, when you're there taking this oath in front of your constituents, saying, "Oh, I stand before God, I stand before all of you. I'm going to serve this organization in all honesty, to the best of my ability. So help me God." And in my experience, it certainly. Does not only promote honesty, but I suppose, what is the word for it? It reckons
also,
a certain
yeah,
degree of respect. It calls for a higher
accountability
degree of respect for that office.
as well as accountability as well. And so I think
Right, and
that
the person assuming the role, they're understanding the weight of their role and of their duties.
yeah, and so that kind of that's kind of a good point on that question. And so then we'll look at a couple more here. Should doctors, police officers, and soldiers be held legally accountable when they violate their professional oaths? And I would say so. I guess we could break this down per one that it's asking here. Doctors, I feel like if I feel like that you have lives on the line. I mean, the same thing really with police officers and soldiers. I mean, lives are potentially at stake of whether or not you do a good job. I think it really depends on intent. I think that goes into it quite a bit. Did the doctor, police officer, or soldier, did they just happen to kind of get in an unfortunate situation, or did they clearly mess up? And if they did, then in that situation, it's possible that they should be held legally accountable.
Right, and certainly in the legal context, intent can be a very difficult thing to prove, but an important thing nonetheless to take into consideration. But on that front, I would certainly agree with you in that sense. I would say yes, those offices. Of course, there's a reason why, and certainly medical professionals, of course, with the Hippocratic Oath, a very serious thing, of course, do no harm for doctors, a very serious thing. And naturally, beyond being their professional oath, of course, the bare minimum being the oath of their profession, their job, their occupation. Excuse me, their occupation and their vocation at large. Of course, this whole lifestyle of being a doctor, a medical professional, that's central to it is do no harm, and sort of the bare minimum with professional oaths is if you violate it, you should be fired. And in terms of legal action, these doctors, certainly ones that willingly violate their Hippocratic oath that actually cause harm, certainly I would say legal action should be taken against them.
Yeah, and so if we go down, we've got two more questions to wrap up this mini debate series that we're going to look at. We are going to skip a couple just for time constraints, but as we skip down to the eighth question here, do wedding vows set unrealistic expectations about lifelong commitment in modern society? Well, I have to say this may be a bit of a controversial statement that I'm about to make, but in the modern society, people who don't want to take wedding vows just never really get married. And so I feel like that's kind of the modern way of doing things in general. And so, in my opinion, the answer is no, because if somebody really wants to make wedding vows, they'll get married. And if someone wants to take a more modern approach, then they won't ever get married at all, therefore never having to set those expectations.
Well, yes, unfortunately, Jake, I would agree with you on some points there. That, of course, in an age that seems to have a real apprehension towards commitment, that does seem to be more and more common, sort of just cohabitating without ever actually making a solid, sincere commitment, certainly in the case of marriage. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that is the uh, full or complete picture there. Say many people
Right.
still do marry, and many don't necessarily take it seriously. Many marry only to divorce not long after. And some would say, on the basis of divorce, perhaps many that have been would say that those wedding vows are unrealistic. And again, this may be perhaps an even more unpopular position on this, Jake. But if we're really going to take those wedding vows seriously through sickness and through health till death do us part, that takes divorce out of the equation. And in my
Yeah.
view, that is the ideal scenario.
Yeah, I would say it certainly is the ideal scenario, and I don't necessarily know that people marry to just with the intent to divorce or think
No,
it's going to
no, they
happen,
never do.
but sometimes it can happen, and in the scenario that it does happen is were the expectations that were set at the beginning of the marriage unrealistic? And I guess the answer to that is no. I think there has to be some sort of standard that holds you together. Now, if the marriage is forcing someone in the marriage, if somebody in the marriage is being forced through a situation that is unhealthy or toxic, I guess you could say, in that scenario, the Lord would, I think, would more likely support. I don't necessarily want to say that the Lord would support a divorce, but he would find it as what the person would need to do in that scenario.
I wouldn't say so. So again, perhaps this day and age it is a somewhat unpopular position, but certainly say I guess in the truest sense of those marriage vows, believe that what God has joined, no man can separate. And again, that sort of takes divorce out of the question. Now, Jake, you mentioned those cases where perhaps people in that marriage, unfortunately, may not be sincere. They may be under the influence at the time of wedding, different compromising factors like that. And in that case, it wouldn't necessarily justify divorce. So there's a different thing. It's mistaken sometimes as a different sort of divorce, so that's not what it is, but an annulment. In other words, it's not disbanding a marriage because you can't do that. What God has joined, no man can separate. But the annulment declares the marriage null and void, declares it invalid for whatever reason. Oh, you were coerced into this marriage; it wasn't valid. Oh, you were under the influence. Something like that, I believe would be a more appropriate solution.
Yes, and so I would actually agree with you as well. And I guess I was kind of being really general when I said divorce, and I was grouping those kind of together. But that is a very important distinction between divorce and an annulment. A very big distinction, but I was kind of grouping those in the same category. So that would be a mistake on my part with that. But I do see what you're saying. Although I have to say that in the same sense, an annulment is, I mean, yes, it is different,
Uh,
but I would have to argue that in the same sense, you're also still not keeping your marriage promises either, which is really where the sin is stemmed from in the Ten Commandments.
you could say that in a sense. I mean, certainly, the resemblance, of course, is that you are parting ways. Of course, it's the reason that is disputed. And of course, my claim would stand on that, that in a case of annulment, it's not that you're disbanding a marriage that was, it's that there were conditions leading up to the marriage that would make a situation that would make it invalid. Different scenarios, which I mentioned previously. Um, but again, I suppose it would be easy to split hairs on that.
Yeah, and I think I think it really comes down to the reason for the divorce and the annulment. What's the reason why somebody is ending a relationship? Is it because their spouse was 5 minutes late to their wedding anniversary date? Or was it because of something a lot more serious, all jokes aside and everything? So I think it really depends. I mean, if it's just because they were 3 or 4 minutes late to the anniversary dinner, probably not a reason to end the
Right, right. Of course,
marriage.
that would not be a valid or qualifying reason for an annulment.
Well, some may say it is, and that's why I threw that out there as a
Well,
possibility. So I think
certainly,
it's
I
more,
suppose in certain churches or, um, well, ecclesial communities or legal frameworks may have different views of that. But again, to the central question, in the eyes of the church, in the eyes of um, God, um, as far as sensibilities on that front and what would be appropriate. That that would be my assessment of it.
all right. Well, that kind of concludes discussion on that. I've got one final question from AI hearing, and we did skip a couple, but this will be the last one. Are oaths outdated rituals, or do they still serve a necessary role in building social trust? And I think this is a perfect question for us to end this discussion or debate.
All righty. Well, I can start, Jake, or whatever you would like. I know I have been starting just because that's sort of the way we began. Whatever you prefer.
Well, I guess I'll go ahead and begin here. So again, I would say No, they're not outdated rituals, which, I think may have been kind of what my approach was when we were doing part one of this series. I kind of leaned more towards that. I think it can be outdated. I think it can be overdone. I think it has to do with the intent behind the oath, how serious of it is it necessary? Um, I've seen in many scenarios where someone has encouraged me to take an oath on a position of office that is not really an actual position or something that's not serious, as more of like, you could say, pretend, I guess, in a sense. I don't think that should be done. And I understand that um, I don't know. I just don't really agree with that. I feel like that we
Mhm.
shouldn't take fake oaths just for some sort of, board game or something like that. I feel
Right.
like
No,
that I
no.
just think that because you're swearing that you're going to do something that's not even like a realistic thing. So I think if you're going to take an oath, it should be for a legitimate office and that it should hold some substantial value. And so that
Yes,
would
I
be
would
kind of
agree.
my
Oaths should
final
be
thing on that.
taken seriously. This isn't something that you do every day for any old thing. No, this is something on serious, on solemn occasions for serious duties and responsibilities that you may be taking on. Of course, that's the rightful place of it, and I agree. Jake certainly could be misused. I suppose in that case they would be overdone, as it were, and I would say here as to the question, do they still serve a necessary role in building social trust? I would say so, and we've seen, of course, a recent turn in tides. Somewhat. There's certainly been speculation of that with the Pew Research surveys and different things that we've covered recently. A number of different events, certainly in our own country and across the West, that have sort of raised those questions. Now, say 5, certainly 10 years ago, well, we had definitely, as a society, considerably fallen away from the foundations of the West, from Christendom, as it were. But in a sense, even if ever so slightly, there seems to be a bit of a swing back in that direction, and in the direction of again of foundations of the West, of Christendom. And in a sense, this question is somewhat ironic. It seems to be a somewhat outdated question in that sense. And so I'd say certainly this question may be outdated, but are oaths outdated? No, no, they certainly serve a role. They are to be taken seriously, even perhaps more so than ever in a world that seems increasingly uncertain. Perhaps in many cases, the one constant, or the one certain thing that you can count on is uncertainty. It is important that those are things that we hold close, that we take seriously these duties and responsibilities. So perhaps, if possible, more than ever, even more so in the past, there is a place for this necessary and rightful role, I would say.
Yeah, and I guess for my final thoughts on our final question here is I'll just go ahead and say that yes, they do serve a necessary role when it comes to social trust, because if people have nothing holding them accountable, then what is there to stop somebody from not doing the right thing? And so I think this certainly helps to give people a reason to do so. And so that will kind of conclude our mini debate series that we did on oath taking. That leads us into our second and final topic for the evening, which is going to focus on whether or not raccoons and skunks should be domesticated. And this comes as there has been a trend that raccoons and skunks could actually become pets, such as dogs or cats. Um, to me, this is probably the most absurd thing that I've heard in my entire life. What about you, Isaac?
It does seem somewhat absurd. I can't say I've had the desire necessarily to take a raccoon, certainly not a skunk, as a pet.
Yeah, I don't understand really what I guess what the positives or the benefits of that would be. I mean, when we talk about raccoons and skunks, I mean, if anything, I feel like they are really wild. They just run around like crazy, boom, 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 and
Right.
I don't know how you could possibly keep one as a pet. And I guess you could say that cats and dogs also do that, but it's in a much different sense.
Right, right. It is in a much more domesticated way, of course.
Yeah, and so I mean it's very interesting that people have started to do this growing trend. And so what do you think? Do you think that we will get to a point where everybody has a raccoon and a skunk somewhere in their house 20, 30 years down the line?
You know, this has been talked about in the past, and some may say, oh, if you really zoom out in terms of the house cats and the dogs that we have today, really come from lions and tigers and wolves, perhaps. Certainly, you could say that. It seems to be a bit different the case with raccoons. And something I would point to, this doesn't exactly seem to be a new thing. I recall, I believe it is like a very old book series. I remember reading, and was later made into a television series, Little House on the Prairie. That's something that occurs. They actually try to take in a raccoon as a pet. And again, I said I haven't necessarily had this desire personally, but again, it's not difficult to see. They do somewhat resemble house cats. They do seem to be very smart. Certainly, we've had them come up on our deck, hair, eat the cat food, even come into the sun porch again. They're very smart, and they do somewhat resemble pets. So it's not too far fetched to see why someone might want that. But then again, that isn't exactly a new thing, and in the past 100, say the 50 years, past 50 years or so, we haven't seen a lot of changes with raccoons, and certainly if you zoom out even more along the course of history, um, I don't know, perhaps there's something I'm missing, but there don't seem to have been many changes with raccoons.
Yeah, I don't think there has been. And of course, one of our special guests was a mole. So, we do have
Yes.
that to consider.
Hmm.
But check back on episode 32 if you're wondering what we're referring to when we talk about that. It's titled with the
Yes, I was a
cheesecake
bit
episode, as
shaken
we
up
call
after
it.
all that.
Yeah, that was quite an earthquake that took place last year.
Uh,
But so I want to go
Disastrous.
back to something that you said. You said that raccoons have actually gotten to the point where they've started opening doors to go
Yes,
into
they're
your
quite
house.
smart. Yes, yes. Albeit a
Wow.
broken door handle, but they certainly can do it.
Hmm. Wow, I'll definitely have to make sure that I watch out for something like that, as I've seen many outside of my house in the backyard. And so, of course, that could be a really big concern. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, what just happened there?
Oh my.
The power is out. Okay, this is
Oh
not
well.
good news.
No,
Um,
it's not.
I just lost power. Luckily, I do have a bit of a light, a little bit brighter than I thought it was, with me
Yes.
here.
Well,
Um,
that's great to hear. So
okay.
a bit of a power outage. Do
Um,
you know what might have caused it, Jake? Do you need to check on it?
well, I don't know that I really want to go and check the breaker system. We've had kind of a bad experience with that earlier this year,
Yes,
as you
I
may
suppose
know
so.
what I'm referring to. Probably still feeling a little bit shocked after that happened.
Yeah, just
Um,
a bit.
so, and okay, this is not that great. In fact, and my flashlight just went out.
Oh, that is not good.
And luckily, I do have another one that is not nearly as bright as that one.
Okay, that's great. That's
Okay,
great.
well, it's
Well,
not necessarily as effective, but it still brings a little bit of light in
well,
here.
that'll work. We can still see you, Jake, and certainly
Okay,
we
well,
can still hear you.
oh my gosh, what is that? I
What?
can't see what it is. Is there something moving? There's something moving.
Well,
There's something moving at the floor, but I can't see what it is.
well, you may want to check on that. It
Yeah,
sounds
let's see.
serious.
I can't exactly see. Oh my my goodness, it's a raccoon. A raccoon has made its way in here. Okay, I've got to do something about this. Okay. Get back, get back, get back. Okay. Get over here. Get over here. I'm trying everything I can at this point in time. I'm gonna get this raccoon and I'm gonna roast it like a marshmallow for s'mores.
All right, let's do it. I'll see you on the top.
Oh no, get back here.
Come on, you got him. You got him. All righty.
Man, I gotta get my chair out of the way. I got you. Got you cornered. Got you cornered. No.
In your house, in your studio. The raccoon had some nerve.
Okay. This has got to do it right here.
All
Pair of
right.
scissors.
All right.
Man. It's broken my ear. There. Oh my gosh. Oh.
That can't be good.
I got you cornered. Oh no. My glass water packet broke again. Oh my goodness. No. Got him cornered this time. Oh, nope.
Alrighty. You got this, Jake?
Here we go. And I've got him trapped inside of this tote here.
Great.
Okay. Come on, buddy. You're going out the door. No. Oh, get away from me now. Oh.
Well, hopefully Jake will be back momentarily after sorting out his raccoon troubles. This is somewhat shocking, considering it was just what we were talking about moments ago with the raccoon domestication. Obviously, this one certainly has not been domesticated. It seems to be quite wild indeed. Jake, how did that
Okay.
go? Were you able to get that raccoon out?
Yes, I was.
Okay, did he cause much damage?
Well, he's the reason the power went out.
Oh, did he claw through the wires or something?
He did. His friend ate some of the wires, and that's what caused the blowout.
Oh my, wow.
Well, I would say I'll probably have to go and fix that. So that's all the time that
Well,
we
I
have
suppose
for
so.
tonight on our episode here.
I reckon it is. Well, again, I believe that concludes things for tonight. So until next time,
I'm Jacob Fulmer.
yes, and I'm Isaac Hedges, host of the Great World Podcast, signing off. Until next time, from all of us at the Great World Podcast and Great World Productions, good night and God bless.